as far as I'm concerned, at least, this debate is about preventing them from stealing our neutrality, and that sort of follows on nicely from the reason I was late, which was we were debating oil and gas resources in this country and how they're busy giving those away as well, or they're being stolen from us from multinationals with the active facilitation of the Irish government. And I think that actually there's a similarity in the approach of the Irish state and Irish governments in terms of how they deal with these interests in both of those issues. And really it seems to be a policy of rolling over in front of powerful corporate and global political interests. And if we roll over enough and if we submit enough, maybe we'll get some dividend, some economic dividend back. I mean, I think that is the essential logic that drives the government, whether it's on their policy vis-a-vis NATO, the policy on Shannon Airport, and frankly their economic policy, or in dealing with our oil and gas resources. And when Alan Shatter uses the word ideological, that's an ideological view. And because it's the view that the world is as it is, and it cannot be any other way. And you have to submit to these powerful interests. We live in a world where big states with big armies and with lots of money dominate, and you're living in cloud cuckoo land if you think we could live in any other kind of world, or that we could challenge that kind of global setup. And therefore, we have no choice but to get into the politics of the lesser of two evils. Because a better world is not possible. So we've got to just make choices about which side we're on in a world where conflict and big power domination is the order of the day. And I think that's the ideological belief, not just of Alan Chatter and the current government, but of previous governments as well. And I mean, that's a very, very poor lookout if that is the case. Because think about what that means, accepting. As I think I didn't hear all of what Joe had to say, but you know, my starting point from this is it is absolutely unacceptable and frankly obscene that more than $1 trillion is spent every year on weapons and military equipment and armies and so on, which are used to kill people, to take lives. When a tiny fraction of that expenditure would solve all of the world's problems of hunger, of homelessness, of lack of clean water, of lack of access to basic medicines, the lack of which result in millions and millions of people dying from things like malaria every year, or from diarrhea. I mean, one of the biggest killers in the world is diarrhea. An eminently curable condition. People don't, for the most part, die of diarrhea in Ireland or in Western Europe or in the United States, but people die in their millions in poorer countries because of diarrhea. So the idea that it is not possible to divert the resources that we currently put into producing nuclear weapons, drones that go bombing Afghanistan, the arms industry, you know, the array of military expenditures, that we can't divert that into producing, for example, salt tablets, which would prevent millions of people from dying from diarrhea. You know, to my mind, of course we can. And it is a pretty awful ideology that suggests that we can't do that. And I think we have to. I think we have a moral obligation to challenge that rationale and logic. I mean, there was the UN, I think it was one of the agencies in the UN at the time of the Kosovo War, which was a war led by NATO, estimated that the cost of that war, just the cost of that war alone, which, if my memory serves me right, was about 40 billion euro, that at that time, at sort of market prices at that time for goods, that the money expended on that war would have been sufficient to provide food for everybody in the world at that time who was hungry, provide them with clean water, and provide them with provide women with free obstetric and gynecological care. Just the money that was spent on that war. And that's an obscenity, to my mind, that we could waste resources in that way. And I mentioned... 1 minute. Okay, that's very quick. I mentioned Kosovo because that's one of the wars that's often presented as a NATO success story, and I think we need to dispel that particular myth as well. I mean, what happened to the former Yugoslavia is an instructive example, because it's often presented as the Western military forces coming in to stop people killing each other. And that's why we actually do need NATO, and that's why it is legitimate, for example, for Irish troops to get involved. I don't think that's the story of what happened in the former Yugoslavia at all. What actually happened was there was a massive economic crisis, which was provoked, tellingly enough, by an IMF structural adjustment program for Yugoslavia at the time, which saw public sector jobs, wages and conditions and public services slaughtered, leading to a massive economic and social crisis in Yugoslavia, which was then exploited by cynical rulers in the old communist regime who began to divert the popular anger against the privations of that austerity program along nationalist lines. And the external intervention turned that crisis into a war, because Cyrus Vance and David Owen, in response to this crisis, drew up a plan for the ethnic partition of Yugoslavia. And then there was another plan after that, the Dayton Accord, which further drew up a plan for the an ethnic patchwork of what previously had been a country where Serb, Bosnian, Croat had lived side by side in the same towns and villages. And as soon as they drew up that plan for ethnic partition, naturally enough, the various warlords and cynical national rulers mobilized immediately to grab as much land and territory as possible by force of arms, leading to an absolutely brutal civil war. And then you had the military intervention as well. But the point being, it was the economic crisis that caused the collapse of Yugoslav society. Militarism from NATO or anywhere else wasn't the answer. It actually made it worse. If you want to solve problems of conflict around the world, you deal with the root cause, which is poverty, which is unemployment, and so on. You don't deal it with militarism. And that's why I think we have to oppose completely any further involvement with military alliances like NATO. And very last point, I would just say, I mean, if there was no other reason not to be involved in NATO, it is the fact that it is a first strike nuclear policy against non-nuclear states. I mean, if you were to say, what is the biggest threat in the world, to my mind, it would be a massive military alliance that has that policy, that says it is acceptable and legitimate to have a policy of using nuclear weapons against other states that don't have them. I mean, how much more of a dangerous threat could you possibly imagine? What possible justification would there be for Ireland to be involved in any shape or form with a military alliance with that policy? I think it's utterly unacceptable. There can be no justification, and we should have nothing to do with it, and we should fight any involvement with NATO.